Hello, I'm Cedric. Welcome back to the Sleep Story Collective. It is a real comfort to have you here tonight. At the Sleep Story Collective, we keep things beautifully simple. We only have one mission: to help you unwind, let the day fall quiet, and ease gently into sleep. So however this evening has found you, you do not need to change yourself before you settle here. You do not need to become calmer all at once. You do not need to empty your mind before you are allowed to rest. You do not need to arrive in perfect order. You can simply come as you are. A little tired, a little full of the day, a little bright around the edges still, perhaps carrying a few thoughts that have not yet found their places. That is all right. This can be the gentler part of the evening, the part where nothing more is expected of you, the part where the world stops asking to be followed quite so quickly, the part where things may begin, little by little, to soften. Some nights do not need solving. They need somewhere to be set down, somewhere warm, somewhere steady, somewhere made of quiet routines and kind hands and familiar shapes. Somewhere nothing is discarded merely because it has been used. Somewhere even worn things are received with patience. Tonight, that place will be a seamstress's workshop, a room of folded linen and smooth walnut, a room of thread wound on wooden spools, of ribbons kept in drawers, of little silver scissors and warm irons, and candles that are never too bright. A room where sleeves are mended, hems are straightened, quilts are turned and smoothed. Buttons are reattached, torn pockets are given back their shape. A room where the day itself seems to be gathered in, pinned neatly, and stitched a little more gently into place. There is something very restful, perhaps, about a person whose whole work is to notice what has loosened and bring it back into calm order. A person who does not frown at a frayed cuff, who does not speak harshly to a split seam, who does not treat wear as failure, only as part of a life honestly lived, only as a sign that a thing has been useful, handled, carried, trusted. And because it has been trusted, it deserves a little care. That is the spirit of tonight's story. Not urgency, not drama, only care, repeated calmly, again and again, in small motions, in quiet loops. The cloth unfolded, the thread drawn through wax, the needle lifted, the seam straightened, the finished piece folded, the next piece brought close. That rhythm will carry us tonight. And if, after a while, it begins to feel less like listening to words and more like sitting in the warmth of the room itself, then the story will be doing exactly what it is meant to do. This is a fairy tale, yes, but a gentle one, a bedtime fairy tale for adults. One where enchantment belongs to ordinary tasks, where the magic is calm, precise, tender, woven into practical things, into ribbon and thread and lantern light, into old drawers that slide easily because they have been opened well for years, into cloth that remembers the warmth of daylight but gives it back slowly by evening, into little silver thimbles polished by use, into a long, narrow table where work has been done so carefully for so many seasons that the wood itself seems to prefer peace. No spectacle, no chaos, only a small workroom near the edge of a sleeping town, where one capable person moves through her tasks so steadily that the whole night begins to follow her example. And there is another comfort in a room like that. It knows how to remain. It does not ask to reinvent itself each night. It knows its own order, its own drawers, its own baskets, its own habits, its own lamplighting sequence, its own workbench, its own quiet end-of-day rituals. That matters, because a place that knows how to remain becomes easy to return to. You do not need to search for it each time. You do not need to earn it. You do not need to arrive with great effort. It is simply there, waiting in the same calm shape, ready to receive the evening again. If this becomes one of those places for you, a room you find yourself returning to when the day has felt too open or too untidy or too full, that would be a good thing. You are always welcome here. This can become part of your night. So before we step through the door of the seamstress's workshop, let the rest of the evening come a little closer around you. Not sharply, not suddenly, only in the way a room changes when lamps are lit one by one. A little softer here, a little warmer there, a little less defined at the edges. Let the thought of chores and messages and small unfinished things move back a pace. Let whatever in you has been trying to keep up with the day relax its grip, if only by a small amount. Not all at once, only enough to notice that you are no longer obliged to rush, only enough to feel that something slower is possible now. Imagine, if you wish, not a grand palace, nor a wild forest, nor a high, dramatic tower, but a modest fairy tale lane after dusk. Old brick, warm shutters, lanterns just beginning to glow in windows. A cobbled path still holding a little trace of the day's warmth. A river somewhere further off, not seen, only suggested by the mild coolness in the air. A bridge of old stone, an inn with its curtains drawn, a baker's window dark now except for one last ember of gold. And near the quiet bend of the lane, beneath a painted sign and a narrow lamp, a small workshop whose front room smells of cloth, beeswax, cedar drawers, and lavender folded into linen. That is where we are going. Not to escape the world, only to spend some time in a gentler room within it. There are some crafts that suit evening particularly well. The care of lamps, the binding of books, the turning down of beds in old inns, the mending of gloves and ribbons and cuffs after the market has gone still. Sewing belongs to that hour, especially the kind of sewing that restores rather than begins, the kind that closes little gaps, that tidies edges, that strengthens what is thinned, that returns shape to what has slouched out of it, that gives the hands something calm and exact to do while the day loosens its hold. And the woman at the center of tonight's story knows that rhythm better than anyone in her part of town. She has lived in it for years. She has lit the same lamps, opened the same drawers, threaded the same needles, pressed the same warm iron to the same folded cloths. And night after night, she has ended her work not by forcing an end to the day, but by stitching it closed in the gentlest possible way. You do not need to picture every detail perfectly. This is not that kind of story. It is written for a listener lying down with eyes closed. So if the room forms only in feeling, that is enough. If the seamstress is known to you mainly through the steadiness of her hands, that is enough. If the workshop becomes only a sense of warm wood, folded cloth, and quiet lamp glow, that is enough too. You need not hold on to every ribbon, every spool, every basket. You need only let the rhythm of the room keep company with you. That is what matters. The feel of care, the feel of order being returned softly, the feel of evening becoming more habitable with each repeated task. And perhaps over time, that is what makes the gentlest stories so re-listenable. Not novelty, not surprise, not the sharp pleasure of not knowing what will happen next. Something quieter. The reassurance of knowing exactly what kind of room you are entering. The comfort of repetition. The ease of familiar patterns. A drawer opened. A ribbon chosen. A seam pinned. A thread guided home. A folded cloth set aside. A lamp lowered. The same room, the same rhythm, the same soft return. That is what this story offers. A return place. A fairy tale workroom that remains gentle from the first line to the last. Tonight's story is called The Seamstress Who Stitches the Day Closed. At the far end of a narrow lane, where the buildings leaned a little closer together than they did on the wider streets, and the paving stones took longer to cool after sunset, there stood a modest shop with a blue-green door and a small carved sign above the window. The sign said only, Seamstress. No gilt, no fanfare, no elaborate promise. It did not need one. The window itself was reassurance enough. Behind the glass, under two low amber lamps, a careful arrangement of folded things rested as though already half asleep. A small stack of linen napkins tied with cream ribbon, a deep blue cloak with its hem perfectly even and its clasp polished softly. A quilt square stretched in a wooden frame, its pattern of moons and little stitched leaves completed, but not displayed for pride, only for calm. A silk ribbon wound around a card. A velvet pincushion with 3 pearl-headed pins resting upright like tiny, pale stars. A basket of mending neatly lined with lavender cloth. And beside it all, on a narrow stand, a pair of silver shears whose handles caught the lamplight in a single curved line. From outside, the room looked warm. Not bright, not busy, only warm, as though the evening itself preferred to gather there. The window never tried to impress. That was not the nature of the place. It did not belong to fashion or hurry or bustle. It belonged to the softer work that comes after the day has already been lived, the work of bringing small things back into order. the work of noticing where cloth had tired, where thread had loosened, where use had left its honest marks. It was a room where aprons, shawls, curtains, sleeves, blankets, ribbons, bodices, pockets, cuffs, collars and ties all found their way at one time or another. Not because they were ruined, because they had served, because they had moved with people through market mornings, kitchen afternoons, orchard evenings, guesthouse nights, and long, ordinary seasons. Things worn with kindness came here, things worn thin by honest use, and the room had a way of making even those tired things feel welcomed. When evening deepened properly, and the lane had quietened enough that voices no longer travelled sharply between the walls, the seamstress arrived. Her name was Etta Wren. She was not old, though years of careful work had given her that settled presence some people mistake for age. She moved neither quickly nor slowly in any showy sense. She simply moved without waste, without fuss. Her hands knew what they were reaching for before they reached. Her shoulders carried no strain that did not belong to the day already ending. Her clothes were simple: a pale blouse, a dark skirt, a work apron folded over one arm when she entered and hung in its place. Her hair, brown with a little copper at the edges in lamplight, was pinned up in a way that could endure many quiet hours at the table. When she opened the blue-green door and stepped into the workshop, the little bell above it made one low note and then let the room return at once to hush. She closed the door gently behind her, hung her coat on the same hook, set her scarf in the narrow drawer beneath the till, placed her gloves on the same shelf above it, and then, as she always did, she stood still for a few moments near the threshold and greeted the room by simply being in it. This pause mattered, more than anyone passing the window would have guessed. It was not idleness, it was arrival. A quiet exchange between the seamstress and the place that held her tools, her shelves, her boards of patterns, her drawers of thread, her baskets of work. She allowed the workshop to settle around her, to let its evening self rise, to show her whether the air had turned a little dry, whether the iron on the warming brick needed another moment, whether the lamps were ready, whether the folded linen on the side table had kept its shape well, whether the bundle of ribbons left by the bench had shifted, whether the room felt as calm as it ought to feel before delicate work began. She did not have to think any of that through in words. She only stood there, hands resting lightly together, and let the room tell her how it was. Then she lit the lamps. Always in the same order. The window lamps first, then the shelf lamp beside the drawers of thread, then the shaded lamp above the main work table at the back. Window, shelf, table. 3 small warmings of the room. 3 familiar points of light. 3 quiet notes in the evening's first chord. The folded linens and finished things in the front window caught the glow first. Then the shelves behind the counter deepened into walnut and amber. The jars of buttons and tapes and tiny cards of needles became visible again in the hush. And finally the work table at the back came fully into itself. There lay the cream cloth, the basket of mending, the shears, the pin tray, the beeswax, the chalk, the tape measure rolled in its little spiral, the warm iron resting on its brick, the little bone-handled awl, the spools of thread already chosen for the night's work. Once the lamps were lit, the workshop no longer felt like a small shop after hours. It became what it truly was, a room prepared for mending, a room prepared for endings, a room prepared for the quiet task of taking the day in and softening its loose edges. Only then did Etta turn the sign in the window from closed to open. Not because she expected callers, there would be none now. The evening belonged to the work already waiting, to the pieces set aside from the day, to the later tasks, to those quiet repetitions that made the room more peaceful with each one completed. That was the hour she valued most, when errands had stopped, when fittings were done, when voices in the lane had thinned, when the workshop could become entirely what it was meant to be. Not a place of trade, a place of calm repair, a place where cloth could rest open under warm light and be handled slowly enough that the whole room seemed to widen around it. Before she touched a single garment or folded thing, Etta listened. Not to ticking as a watchmaker might, not to a great silence. The workshop had no great silence in it, only little faithful sounds. The faint whisper of lamp flame, the soft grain of cloth beneath her palm when she touched the table covering, the small, dry rustle of ribbon cards when she checked the nearest drawer, the low, weighted sound of the iron being lifted and set down once on its brick, the leather-soft hush of folded wool when her fingers brushed a mending basket. The workshop spoke in these ways. A room made not of noise, but of little confirmations. Everything ready, everything where it belonged, everything prepared to move from one calm task to the next. And as she stood beside the table and let the room speak, Etta could feel the evening deciding itself, a little more inward, a little more tender, a little more willing to be handled gently. Then she crossed to the main table and unfolded the cloth. It was pale cream linen, softened by many washings, and she always smoothed it the same way, from the center outward, both palms guiding the last small creases away. Then she laid out the tools, the silver shears to the right, the small thread snips above them, the pin tray, the beeswax, the tailor's chalk, the tape measure, the thimble, the awl, the little pressing cloth, the velvet tomato of pins, the ribbon cards, the basket of thread, the basket of mending. And in the upper left corner of the table, the ledger, closed for now, waiting. Every tool had its place. Every place had been decided long ago. The room never had to search for itself. It simply entered its rhythm. Cloth, tools, lamps, listening. Then the first piece. Tonight, as on many nights, the first line of work had already been chosen before Etta arrived. She always sorted the day's mending in the late afternoon, when the light was still honest and the front of the shop had quietened. By evening, only the gentlest sequence remained. Now it waited in a shallow row beneath the table lamp. A baker's apron with a loosened hem and flour still faintly whitening one lower fold. A child's winter cloak with one ribbon tie coming free at the collar. A pale house dress with a torn pocket seam. A quilted bed cover folded twice, one corner binding worn thin. A curtain panel from the little inn near the bridge where the lower edge had frayed against the floorboards. A linen shirt with one cuff thinning at the fold. None of it was urgent. None of it was dramatic. Nothing needed rescuing. These were the ordinary tenderings of a town, the soft repairs that keep daily life from loosening too far. The kinds of things a good workshop receives at the end of a day and returns better rested by morning. Etta sat. The work chair gave its familiar, quiet creak. The lamp drew her hands into its amber circle. Outside, the lane darkened another shade. Inside, the shelves, drawers, baskets, ribbons, and folded cloth settled around her into a deeper hush. And she began. She always began with the piece nearest her left hand. Not because it mattered most, because that was where her hand naturally fell first. In a room like hers, even that was enough reason. Tonight, it was the apron. Sturdy linen, faded cream with blue binding at the top edge. The hem along one side had slipped where repeated washing and wear had tired the thread. Etta turned it over once in the light, ran her finger along the line, tested the old stitching. Then she drew out the matching thread from the basket, passed it once through the beeswax, and threaded the needle. The motions were so familiar, they scarcely seemed motions at all. Thread, wax, needle, knot. Then the fabric under her hand. She folded the hem back into its remembered line, pinned it, then began to stitch. In, through, over, drawn home. In, through, over, drawn home. A rhythm quiet enough to settle the shoulders simply by being repeated. She never stitched quickly in the evening. Daytime had its own pace. Fittings, deliveries, measurements, small conversations, promises about hems and ribbons and collection times. Even that was never frantic in her shop. But the evening belonged to something slower. The work done now did not need explanation. It knew its own order. The apron needed only calm hands and a straight line. So Etta gave it both, a few inches at a time. Pin removed, stitch continued, palm smoothing the cloth behind the needle. When the repaired length was done, she pressed it lightly beneath the cloth with the warm iron. Not hard, never harshly, only enough to let the hem lie flat and content again. Then she folded the apron into a neat rectangle, the fresh line of stitching hidden inside, and placed it on the shelf marked Evening Finished. That shelf stood one level above the work table, where completed things gathered gradually through the night. Never crowded, always spaced with a little air around them. She liked finished pieces to rest. She liked them to look settled before they went home again. The child's cloak came next. Deep green wool with a soft nap and a lining printed faintly with tiny, pale stars. Its ribbon tie at the collar had loosened on one side, nothing more. A small thing, but little openings are how larger loosenings begin. Etta laid the cloak flat, smoothed the shoulder, set the ribbon into place. The collar wanted 3 anchoring stitches and then a reinforcing line beneath where the ribbon met the seam. No more. She chose thread just darker than the wool, so the work would sit quietly when done. Then she stitched the tie in place with the same patient exactness. Through the ribbon, into the seam allowance beneath, back again, then the tiny reinforcement. The ribbon lay properly once more, not stiff, not trapped, only secure. She tied it in a loose bow and then untied it again, just to feel the movement. A repaired thing should still move naturally. That mattered to her. Good mending does not imprison cloth. It restores its ease. Satisfied, she brushed the collar flat and laid the cloak over the back of a padded hanger to rest. The house dress followed. Pale blue, with a small white sprig printed across the cloth, and one pocket seam pulled open along the side where a hand had entered too often, too briskly, for too many ordinary days. Etta liked pocket repairs. They were practical, intimate in a modest way. The kind of repair that said someone had carried their small, daily things honestly. Keys, thread, coin, handkerchief, a folded note. Nothing grand, only the useful closeness of life. She slipped her hand inside the pocket to feel the opening from within, then turned the dress slightly on the table so the seam sat better under the lamp. This one wanted stronger thread. Not because the cloth was heavy, because pocket seams live under repeat strain. She stitched from inside where possible, so the repair would show least and hold best. Short, firm stitches. Then a second line within the allowance. Then a smoothing of the pocket edge. Then the warm iron through the pressing cloth. When she slipped her hand in again to test it, the pocket welcomed it properly. That, too, was her measure, not appearance alone, how the thing felt when used. A repair is only complete when the object trusts itself again. By now, the workshop had begun its first, deeper settling. The first finished piece rested on the shelf. The cloak waited on its hanger. The dress lay cool again after pressing. The window lamps had become warmer against the darkening lane. The side drawers seemed deeper in tone. The scent of linen and wool had risen a little into the lamp heat. Etta sat back for a brief moment and listened. Not because she was done, because a room deserves to be heard as it changes. The soft cloth hush, the low warmth of the iron, the lamp flame, the tiny metallic murmur of pins when her sleeve brushed the velvet tomato, the breathing quiet of folded work. Nothing sharp, nothing rushed. The workshop had accepted the first wave of the evening and was calmer for it. That mattered. A room shaped by repeated care becomes part of the care itself. The quilted bed cover was heavier. Patchwork in muted squares of plum, russet, cream, and dusk blue. The corner binding had worn thin where hands must have lifted it and turned it back night after night. Etta unfolded the cover only as much as needed. Large cloth has its own dignity. It need not be spread carelessly to prove itself. She checked the worn edge, selected a binding strip from the drawer of prepared lengths. Dusk blue, close to the old, but not pretending to be the same. She basted it in place first, with long temporary stitches, then folded the edge neatly around and secured it by hand. This took longer. Not because it was difficult, because the scale asked for more body, more shifting of weight, more smoothing of bulk. Her left hand guided the layers, her right worked the needle. Then the cloth moved forward across the table, a little more, then again. Binding repair always felt to her like quiet shore work, bringing an edge back into safe form so the rest could remain undisturbed. When the corner was secure, she pressed it lightly, and ran her palm over the nearby quilt squares, as though to reassure them too. Then she refolded the cover carefully and laid it on the lower finished shelf where the larger pieces rested. The curtain from the inn near the bridge came after that, a long panel of faded honey-colored cloth with a narrow woven trim and a frayed lower edge where it had brushed floorboards for too many seasons. Curtains carried the habits of rooms with them. This one smelled faintly of lavender soap, firelight, and old wood. The sort of smell that belongs to guest rooms made ready at the same hour every evening. Etta smiled with her eyes only. She had mended curtains for that inn many times. The lower edge wanted turning again and reinforcing with a hidden band. She measured it, marked it in faint chalk, trimmed the frayed threads away, folded the new line, pinned, then stitched the length in a slow, unbroken rhythm that suited late evening work perfectly. Long hems are good for sleepy minds, not because they are dull, because they are dependable. A long line, a known movement, a steady hand traveling through cloth. In, draw through, lay flat. In, draw through, lay flat. The sort of work that lowers a room around itself. When the curtain was done, she pressed the hem and then held the lower edge up for a moment beneath the lamp. The line ran true. The cloth fell better. The trim settled quietly again. She folded the panel in broad, careful pleats and tied it with an old cream ribbon kept for larger finished pieces. It joined the quilt on the lower shelf. Two completed tasks now resting in the dimmer part of the room. Two ordinary things returned to ease. The workshop did not congratulate itself. It did not need to. The feeling of order itself was enough. That was one of the gifts of craft. It lets satisfaction remain quiet. It does not need to become noise. The linen shirt and its thinning cuff came last in this first sequence. This was finer work. Not because the shirt was grand, because cuff folds show everything. A bad repair there lives close to the eye and the wrist. Etta unfolded the sleeve, turned the cuff back, examined the wear at the fold. The cloth had not split yet. It had merely grown tender, too tender to ignore. She cut a support strip from soft linen, laid it inside the cuff where it would strengthen the fold without stiffening it. Then she stitched it in with the smallest regular hem stitches, pale thread disappearing into pale cloth. This was work that asked the room to come closer and quieter. Even the lamp seemed to lower itself around the white linen. Her hands moved more delicately, the thread shorter now so it would not tangle, the needle finer, the stitches almost invisible except in the tilt of the light. When it was done, the cuff kept its softness but no longer carried the same strain. Etta pressed it once, folded the sleeve back into shape, and laid the shirt on a padded board until morning so the support could settle fully. By the time the first row of mending had been tended, the room had deepened into a fuller later hour. The lane beyond the window was dark now, except for the occasional lantern passing at a distance. The front window held more reflection than view. The side shelf lamp seemed lower and warmer. The baskets by the bench looked calmer for having surrendered their first pieces, and the shelf, marked "Evening Finished," had begun to gather its quiet company. The apron, the cloak, the dress, the quilt, the curtain, the shirt awaiting its settled shape, each somewhere proper, each no longer asking anything more of the night. Etta opened the ledger and wrote, "Apron hem restitched and pressed, collar ribbon secured, pocket seam reinforced, quilt corner rebound, in curtain hem turned and set, linen cuff supported." Her handwriting was neat and rounded, not decorative, simply easy on the eye. Writing gave the work a second kind of rest. The shelf held it in cloth and form. The page held it in memory. And Etta valued both. At that point in the evening, she allowed herself a pause not required by the sewing itself. She leaned back a little, rested her palms flat on the table, and let the room settle more fully around her. If the story is beginning to feel softer around the edges, I am glad. If you would like to keep finding your way back to places like this whenever the night needs them, subscribing to the Sleep Story Collective means this quiet room will always remain close. For now, let us continue and follow the seamstress a little further into the deeper hour of her work. There was a second room behind the workshop. Not large, not hidden, only set a little farther in, beyond a curtain of heavy blue fabric that kept the draft from the back passage from reaching the main table too quickly. This room held the larger rolls of cloth, the finished bolts, the cedar press, the shelves of blankets and coverlets, the baskets of ribbons, the paper patterns, the irons for heavier use, and the little drying rail where hand-washed lace and ribbon rested overnight. It was cooler there. The scents were deeper too. Cedar, wool, starch, old paper patterns, lavender stored between folded blankets. Etta always visited this room in the middle stretch of the evening. Not at the beginning, not only at closing. It belonged to the deeper hour, when the first wave of mending had been absorbed by the main room and the later work could begin. She rose now, took the hand lamp from its hook, and slipped through the curtain. The back room greeted her in its usual composed way. Rolls of cloth stood upright in their tall bins. Sage, oat, slate blue, plum, russet, cream. Nothing too bright. The good cloth always preferred quieter colors. Shelves along the wall held folded blankets arranged by size. Below them sat labeled drawers. Ribbons, buttons, lace, lining, tape, braid, mending patches, paper patterns. The cedar press stood by the far wall, solid and still, a useful, quiet presence more than a piece of ornament. Near the window, beneath a lamp with a deep brass shade, rested a cutting table covered in green baize. Here, Etta did the calmer backroom tasks, preparing lengths of tape, sorting buttons, pressing finished folds, rewinding ribbon cards, checking the little store of things that would be needed not tonight alone, but on future evenings yet to come. Something prepared, something checked, something maintained. The rhythm followed her into this room just as faithfully as it had at the main table. She set the lamp down, opened the drawer of ribbons first. Inside lay lengths wound on cards or tied in soft loops, cream cotton tape, narrow velvet in moss and plum, blue silk, brown twill tape for aprons and workwear, pale satin for special linings and trimmings. A box of tiny bells, no bigger than thimbles, sat in one corner, used only occasionally on festival sashes or cradle charms. Etta did not use them often, but she liked that they were there. Not noisy little bells, soft ones, the kind that make almost no sound unless a room is already very still. Tonight she needed more cream tape for finishing bundles and a length of dark braid to edge a basket liner waiting on the side shelf. She measured both, cut them cleanly, then rewound the remaining lengths so the drawer would close calmly rather than with any hint of tangle. That mattered. A tangled drawer unsettles a room. An ordered one lets the hand enter without resistance. She believed that instinctively, perhaps because so much of her work was the returning of ease. Next, she checked the blanket shelf. A coverlet she had turned the day before lay ready to be folded back into its deep square. A child's winter blanket with a patched edge had dried beautifully and wanted only brushing and ribbon ties. A stack of guest house pillow covers awaited pressing. These were not urgent tasks. That was exactly why they suited this hour. Etta took the winter blanket down first, brushed the nap lightly with a soft clothes brush, folded it once, then again, then tied it with broad tape in a loose cross. The repaired edge disappeared inside the fold, protected and unremarked. A good repair does not require applause. It simply makes future use gentler. She placed the blanket on the lower shelf marked Morning Collection. Then she pressed the pillow covers, one after another, each folded and stacked under a warm cloth so their lines would remain quiet until morning. The movements became almost ceremonial. Lift, lay flat, cover, press, fold, stack, again, again, again. The sort of rhythm that teaches the room to breathe more slowly. At the far end of the back room, beside the cedar press, stood a narrow rod from which hung the pieces not waiting to be repaired, but waiting to be returned. A shawl wrapped in tissue, an evening jacket in smoke blue cloth, 2 aprons, a child's pinafore, a set of bed curtains for the guest room above the old inn. Etta checked them one by one, not for fault, only for calm. A straight hem, a secure button, a tie lying correctly, no stray thread, no fold creased the wrong way. She liked to confirm such things before the room grew too late. Confirmation is a kind of care too. Not every evening task needs fixing. Some need simply to be witnessed and known to be well. That too belonged to her trade. Noticing what no longer needed her. Allowing finished things to rest without further interference. There was peace in that. Perhaps a deeper peace than constant correction. The shawl was fine. The jacket hung true. The pinafore ties were smooth and equal. The inn curtains breathed quietly in their folds. Satisfied, she left them to their hooks. From the drawer of buttons, she took a shallow wooden tray and emptied it onto the green baize. Pearl buttons, bone buttons, dark horn buttons, plain workwear buttons of wood and covered cloth, one or two gilt ones wrapped separately in paper for special garments. She sorted them by type and size, not because they had been thrown into confusion, only because the evening had reached the point where little orderliness felt especially good to the hands. Buttons are small moons in a seamstress's room, small pale confirmations, small closures waiting quietly for use. Etta lined them in gentle groups, then returned them to the tray and the tray to the drawer. There was no theatre in this, no great significance, only the calm of a room being kept kindly enough that tomorrow would not need to begin by untangling today. That mattered to her, to leave the future a good beginning, a room ready for its next hour, its next evening, its next piece of mending. She crossed to the pattern cabinet next. Inside lay neat rolls and folded leaves of paper marked in pencil. Apron fronts, sleeve shapes, nightdress panels, curtain measurements, child's cloak pieces, simple bodices, guest house pillow covers. She checked the papers used that week, flattened the corners that had begun to lift, retied one bundle, replaced a cracked card backing behind another, then slipped a lavender sachet into the bottom drawer where the finer tissue patterns lay. This was not necessary in any narrow sense, but it was workshop sense. A room does not become restful only by finishing visible tasks. It becomes restful by tending the hidden places too. The drawbacks, the underside of folded cloth, the wrapped papers, the spare tapes, the corners no customer ever sees. These quiet, unseen acts shape the feeling of the whole place. And Etta knew that, perhaps better than most. When she returned through the blue curtain to the main room, the bench lamp seemed warmer than before, and the workshop more fully itself. The first finished pieces rested where they should. The baskets had grown lighter. The table looked ready for the next wave of calmer work. This was the hour she liked most. Not because it was dramatic, because the room had now entirely forgotten the daytime version of itself. No measurements waiting, no conversations lingering, no fittings, no calls at the door. Only the deeper work, the folding in, the making ready, the soft, long descent through smaller and smaller tasks until the whole evening began to feel stitched into one continuous seam. There was still more to do. A basket of ribbons needing re-edging, 2 dining napkins from the inn requiring fresh corner stitches, a dressing gown tie to be replaced, a quilt square to be joined to its neighbour in a frame kept for slow handwork, and later still, the final task of every evening, the one from which the story took its name. But that would come when the lamps were lowered again. Not yet. For now, Etta chose the basket of ribbons. Not festival ribbons, not extravagant things. Useful household lengths. Hat ties, apron ties, curtain ties, bundle ties. A few were fraying at the ends. One had lost its folded tip. Another had begun to split where it had been tied too many times around the same sheaf of herbs. She sorted them by width and colour, then cut neat fresh angles or turned in their ends by the smallest hem. One by one. Blue, cream, green, brown. A rose-coloured one for a child's Sunday bonnet. Not too bright, only warm. When she had finished, she wound them again on their cards and stacked the cards in a fan so the drawer would open to beauty as well as order. Beauty matters more when it is gentle, not lavish, not demanding, simply there for the eye to rest upon if it happens to fall that way. The dining napkins from the inn were next. Good linen, thick enough to last. The corner stitches had given a little at 2 folds. Nothing more. She turned them out under the light, found the corners, and worked the tiny repairs with thread that matched so closely the eye would struggle to find them later. Corner work suits the later hour. It asks for quiet exactness, not speed, not invention, only the willingness to let small, regular stitches gather neatly into place. When the corners were sound again, she pressed the napkins and folded them into long, clean rectangles. Then tied them with narrow tape and laid them on the inn stack at the side shelf. It gave her quiet pleasure to imagine them tomorrow, smooth and square, beside a jug of milk, a loaf board, a bowl of fruit, or folded on the dresser of a guest room where morning light would touch them, without ever knowing what calm evening hands had prepared them. Not all care needs to be visible to be felt. The dressing gown tie took only a short while. A simple replacement, a new channel sewn where the old stitching had worn thin, a fresh cord drawn through with the little bodkin, tied at the ends, tested once, then again. Etta liked such tasks for their simplicity. A clear before, a clear after. The garment had become easier to trust again. Nothing more needed saying. She laid it over a hanger and brushed the sleeve smooth, then brought the quilt frame closer. This was slower work. Not repair, exactly. Completion. 2 squares waited to be joined. One pale with moon-shaped leaves, the other a darker field of stitched stems and small stars. She aligned the edges, pinned them, then began the overcast joining stitches that would draw them together without thickness. This kind of work is good for the heart of a night, not because it is sleepy, because it is so patient that sleep finds it easily. A little edge, a little joining, thread drawn home. A little edge, a little joining, thread drawn home. The whole room seemed to breathe in that rhythm. The workshop became very quiet then. Quiet in the best sense. Not empty, not lifeless, only settled. The front window was all reflection now. The blue-green door deeper in tone. The shelves darkened to low amber and brown. The finished shelf looked like a series of small promises. Things tended, things made ready, things returned to ease. Etta's hands moved through the quilt seam without hurry. The iron cooled slightly on its brick and was turned once so it would keep the right amount of warmth for the last pressings later. The lamp flame fluttered only enough to remind the room it was living. Even the pins in their velvet cushion seemed more still. This was the hour when her workshop most fully felt like a fairy tale room. Not because anything extraordinary happened in it, because ordinary acts, done gently enough, begin to feel enchanted. A thread passing through cloth, a folded edge lying flat, a ribbon smoothed between finger and thumb. An old room, warm with repeating care. Sometimes that is all enchantment is. Everyday life handled tenderly enough to glow. When the quilt seam was complete, Etta trimmed the thread, checked the join with her fingertips, then left the frame propped at the side of the table, where the two joined squares could rest visible beneath the lamp for a while longer. She liked that too. Not every completed task needed putting away at once. Some things suited a little lingering in the room. A repaired seam, a newly joined square, a folded napkin stack, a hanger holding a finished cloak. The workshop was not merely a place where tasks were done. It was a place where done things were allowed to settle. There is a difference, and in that difference lies a great deal of calm. Now the evening had reached its gentlest third, the part in which no new significant repair would be begun, the part reserved for folding, brushing, sorting, writing, and the final preparations that allow the room to close without strain. Etta loved this part as much as any, perhaps more. She cleaned the pin tray first, removing the bent or blunted pins and setting them aside for tomorrow's metal jar. Then she wiped the shears and laid them back in their felt-lined slot. She coiled the tape measure, wound the leftover thread back onto its card, returned the beeswax to its drawer, folded the pressing cloth, brushed the table free of snipped fibers and stray ends. Then she opened the shallow tray of offcuts. Here she sorted the evening's smallest remains. Useful strips in one envelope, 2 short pieces in another for patching, paper labels stacked flat, the little curling strands and dry chalk crumbs discarded. Even scraps had their order here. Not everything is kept, but what is not kept is still dismissed gently. She took a fresh page in the ledger and wrote the second half of the night's notes. Ribbon ends turned and renewed. In the napkin corners secured. Dressing gown tie replaced. Quilt squares joined. Back room drawers checked and ordered. Patterns flattened. Blanket brushed and tied. Pillow covers pressed. The writing slowed her in the nicest way. Ink has its own pace. It cannot be hurried without showing it. Her hand moved evenly. The page received the evening, and with each line, the workshop felt more gathered, more whole, more ready to be left in peace. She blotted the ink and left the ledger open while she moved to the side shelf for the final shelf check. The in stack straight, the family pieces labelled, the wraps square, the ribbons rehoused, the finished blankets tied, the shirt cuff settled properly, the cloak still hanging with the bow smooth at the collar. All in order, all in place, all at ease. There remained only the closing ritual now, the one she never skipped, the one performed whether the day had been busy or quiet, whether many pieces had passed through her hands or only a few. It was simple enough that anyone seeing it might have mistaken it for habit alone. Perhaps it was habit, but in her town, habits sometimes become the gentlest sort of magic. Above the inside of the blue-green door, looped on a wooden peg, hung a narrow length of dark indigo cloth backed with soft linen. It was not large, only long enough to drape in a quiet arc above the doorframe when finished. Its edges were bound in faded gold thread, and each evening, after the last work was done, Etta took it down and added 3 small stitches to the line of thread that ran along its center. Not decorative stitches, not letters, not symbols anyone needed to decipher. Only 3 neat joining stitches in thread chosen to match the color of that day's later hour. Sometimes smoke blue, sometimes warm brown, sometimes grey-green, sometimes plum, sometimes cream. A little line added to the long seam at the heart of the cloth. 3 stitches, no more. Then the cloth was hung above the door again, and in the town, people said softly to one another that Etta had stitched the day closed. No one believed anything fearful about it. No one imagined the town would come apart without those stitches. It was not that kind of story. Only that the lane always seemed softer after she hung the cloth. The inn lamps dimmed more kindly. The baker's shutters sat quieter. The rooms above the bridge guest house settled more easily. Curtains drifted into their folds. Keys found their hooks. Children's sleeves lay tucked over quilts. Aprons hung in kitchens. And the whole evening seemed a little better held. Perhaps that came only from knowing there was still one person at the end of the lane, moving through her calm closing ritual with full attention. Perhaps that is all towns need sometimes. Not magic in the loud sense. Only the comfort of a known kindness happening at the right hour. Etta herself did not think much about what others said. She simply performed the ritual because it belonged to the room. Because the room would not have felt complete without it. Because her own hands, after all the mending and pressing and folding and tying, wanted that final simple seam to close the circle of the day. She brought the indigo cloth down now, laid it flat upon the table, smoothed it once from end to end, then went to the drawer of special threads. These were the threads she reserved for evening closing. Subtle threads, quiet threads, nothing flashy, nothing bright. Tonight she chose a warm, dusk-coloured silk, somewhere between plum and fading rose, the colour the sky had briefly worn just before surrendering to blue-black. She drew the thread through the needle, waxed it lightly, then anchored it at the last point where the previous evening's stitches ended. 3 small stitches, that was all. In, through, drawn home. In, through, drawn home. In, through, drawn home. She did not speak during it. The workshop seemed to quieten of its own accord each time. When the 3rd stitch was done, she turned the cloth over and knotted the thread invisibly into the backing. Then she held the line beneath the lamp. One more evening joined to the others. One more quiet, close, in a scene that had been growing for years. One more day gathered in and set gently down. She hung the cloth above the door once more. It lay there in its familiar arc, indigo and gold in the low light, not demanding to be noticed, only right where it belonged. And the room, as though recognizing its final gesture, seemed to lower itself another degree into rest. Now the lamps could be turned down. Now the drawers could be fully closed. Now the bench could be left clear. Now the day, in every sense that mattered, had been stitched closed. Etta stood beneath the cloth for a moment, with her hands lightly folded. Then she smiled with her eyes only, and turned back to the workshop. There was no more work to do, only closing, only receiving the room in its finished state. She extinguished the back room lamp first, then lowered the shade of the side shelf lamp so its circle of light narrowed and warmed. The front window lamps she left until last. The workshop changed immediately. It did not darken in any harsh way, it simply grew more inward. The finished shelf glowed softly. The table looked restful rather than active. The curtain to the back room held a deeper blue. The blue-green door beneath the closing cloth seemed calmer than ever. Etta checked the finished shelf one last time. The apron folded square, the cloak bow smooth, the dress pocket easy in its line, the quilt corner secure, the curtain tied, the shirt cuff settled, the napkins stacked, the blanket bound, the travel journal ribbon true. The evening's quiet work gathered there like a row of small reassurances. Things used, things worn, things now returned kindly to themselves. Then she turned to the table, folded the cream cloth in thirds, then in thirds again, placed it at the upper corner, ready to be put away, laid a fresh one beneath it for tomorrow. That mattered to her. Tomorrow should not arrive to a room burdened by tonight. Tomorrow should meet readiness. A clear table, orderly drawers, tools in place, a fresh cloth waiting, the same good beginning preserved. A workshop that thinks kindly of its future self becomes easier to trust. And trust, in rooms like this, is everything. The body knows it, even if it cannot say why. She closed the ledger at last, but not before adding the room note at the bottom of the page. Evening settled gently. Then beneath it, in smaller letters, table clear, shelf ready, closing cloth hung. She blotted the ink, waited, then slid the ledger into its drawer. The drawer closed with a padded wooden hush. That sound was one of her favorites in all the workshop. The sound of a day received and put quietly away. The sound of nothing dragging onward. The sound of completion without ceremony. There was one final thing she always did before leaving. She sat down again in the work chair, folded her hands on the edge of the cleared table, and listened. Not to a grand silence. There was no grand silence in such a place. Only the subtle quiet of settled objects and finished work. The lamp low, the shelves holding their folded cloth, the faint warmth leaving the iron by degrees, the blue curtain hanging still, the repaired pieces resting without strain, the indigo closing cloth above the door, the gentle hush of linen, wool, ribbon and paper inhabiting the room together. No sound of hurry remained, no sharpness, no unfinished pressure. The workshop had become exactly what it was meant to be after hours. Not a place of effort now, a place of held calm. A place where the day had been gathered in with enough patience that nothing in it needed to raise its voice any longer. She stayed there for some time, long enough for the low light to soften the last details of the room, long enough for the shoulders to release whatever work had been left in them, long enough for the evening to stop feeling like something moving forward and begin feeling like something resting where it had arrived. This was part of the craft too, not the sewing itself, the receiving after, the pause after the repair, the stillness after the final fold. The room was not made peaceful only by what Etta did in it. It was made peaceful by how she let things settle when she was done. A seam pressed and then left alone. A ribbon tied and then not fussed over. A repaired book set flat and not reopened. A folded blanket left tied. A cloth hung. A lamp lowered. A room allowed to become restful by being trusted to remain so. That trust made all the difference. At last, she rose, put on her coat, took her gloves from the shelf, looped her scarf once around her neck, then turned and looked into the workshop one final time. Not sentimentally, simply attentively. A room deserves to be seen in its finished state. The shelf of mended pieces, the clear table, the folded cloth, the quiet drawers, the low lamps, the indigo cloth above the door. The workshop had done what it was meant to do. It had received the day, not fought it, not erased it, received it, taken in what had frayed, what had loosened, what had thinned, what had opened, and returned it with patience to better order. That was enough work for any evening, enough usefulness, enough kindness, enough quiet. She turned the sign from open to closed. The word did not feel hard. It felt complete. Then she opened the blue-green door and stepped into the lane. The little bell gave one low note. The mist had thickened slightly now. The stones had cooled. The windows opposite were mostly dark, with only a few soft glows remaining behind curtains. Etta turned and locked the door. One turn of the key, then another. Firm, certain. Behind the upper half of the window, the lamp still glowed softly. From outside, no one could hear the paper hush of the room, but she knew it was there. The folded cloth, the finished shelf, the sorted drawers, the closing cloth above the door. The whole workshop, holding itself in the dark without strain. She trusted it. And because she trusted it, she could leave it. She stood a moment beneath the sign. The lane looked gentler now, the workshop more modest and more beautiful, for making no great announcement of itself. Just a warm window, a painted door, a single low lamp, a room of mended things beyond glass. Then she began to walk home, not quickly, at the same unhurried pace the evening had taught her. The mist lay softly along the cobbles. Somewhere further off, near the bridge, a lantern moved and then was gone. The old inn windows held a little amber. The baker's shutters were closed. The town was doing what towns do at that hour. Drawing in, folding down, returning itself to quieter forms. And behind her, at the end of the lane, the seamstress's workshop remained as it always would. Warm, orderly, ready again for another evening when the time came. If you return there on some future night, you will find it waiting. The painted door, the carved sign, the front window with folded linen and soft lamp glow, the walnut shelves, the drawers of ribbon and thread, the cream cloth on the table, the side curtain to the back room, the low brass lamp, the finished shelf, the indigo closing cloth above the door, the same calm craftswoman entering at the same gentle hour, coat hung up, gloves set down, Lamps lit in order. Window, shelf, table. The same first pause. The same first piece drawn close. The same quiet, repeated motions. Thread, wax, needle, knot, smooth, pin, stitch, press, fold. That is part of the comfort. Not that the room changes each time, that it knows how to remain, that it knows how to receive you whenever you return. This can become part of your night, a room you know, a bench you know, a sequence of small repairs you no longer have to picture clearly because your whole self already understands the feeling of them. The apron hem straightened, the ribbon set right, the pocket strengthened, the quilt corner bound, the inn curtain folded, the napkins stacked, the closing cloth hung, the workshop stilled. You can return here whenever you need rest. This place will be here when you come back. It will not ask for anything difficult from you. It will simply open the same room, light the same lamps, set out the same tools, and begin again. Now the story has reached its finished shelf. Its work is done. Its seams are settled. Its ribbons are smoothed. Its drawer fronts are closed. Its ledger is written. Its lamps are lowered. Nothing is left open in any pressing way. Even the pieces prepared for tomorrow rest in proper order. That matters too. To know that unfinished things may still be laid down gently. To know that not everything must be completed before peace is allowed in. The workshop knows this. The seamstress knows this. And perhaps some quiet part of you knows it too. And so let the room grow softer now. Let the shelf of mended things recede a little into the warm dark. Let the blue-green door become a smaller shape in the mind. Let the indigo closing cloth above it turn from detail into feeling. The story does not need to remain sharp, only calm, only tender, only dependable. What matters now is not every drawer and pin and folded ribbon. What matters is the rhythm that the room has laid down. A rhythm of receiving and returning. A rhythm of care repeated without hurry. A rhythm that lets what was frayed become held again. That rhythm remains even as the details loosen. The apron rests folded. The cloak waits on its hanger. The pocket seam is strong again. The quilt corner lies quiet. The inn curtain falls true. The napkins are pressed. The ribbon drawer is orderly. The pattern papers are flat. The blanket is tied. The ledger page is written. The closing cloth is hung. The day is stitched closed. All is in order. All is tended. All is enough. If there is any part of your day that still feels open at the edge, it may soften now. If there is any thought still hanging slightly loose, it may draw closer to rest. If there is any inward thread still pulled a little tight, it may ease. Not by force, only because the room is already prepared. The table is clear. The shelf is ready. The lamp is low. The lane is quiet. And somewhere at the end of that little fairy tale street, the seamstress has left the workshop in such good order that nothing in it needs another thing tonight. That is a restful truth. Nothing more is needed. You can return here whenever you need rest. If you would like to keep this door closed, subscribing to the Sleep Story Collective means a new, quiet room will always be waiting whenever the night asks for one. Now let the lamps grow softer. Let the lane fall still. Let the folded cloth remain on the cleared table. Let the indigo closing cloth hang above the door in its familiar curve. Let the whole workshop become what it was always meant to be at this hour. Not a place of work any longer. A place of settled things. A place where the day was handled with enough tenderness that it could be put down in peace. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you for stepping into this gentle room. I'm Cedric, and from all of us at the Sleep Story Collective, good night. Sleep well.